The biggest barrier that I find is the people's attitudes and people's assumptions and misconceptions. That is slowly improving, but that's still got a long way to go because that's quite a hard barriers to bring down. It's changing people's mindset.
Hi, and welcome everybody, and we hope you enjoy this podcast called On the Tip of My Tongue. Now, I'm Rob Edwards.
And I'm Jonathan Hirons.
And this podcast is a follow-up to a film which Jonathan made about aphasia. So, what is aphasia? Well, it's a condition caused by some kind of injury to the brain, which is often, could be a stroke, or could be just falling off a bike. And it affects your ability to use language in all its forms. Speaking, writing, reading, sending text, whatever. 350,000 people in the UK suffer from a debilitating condition called aphasia. Fewer than half this number suffer from Parkinson's, and yet most people have heard of Parkinson's, whilst almost nobody has heard of aphasia. In this episode, we talk to Sarah Petherbridge, a disability trainer and speaker. Sarah was born profoundly deaf and worked in the corporate sector as a professional for 30 years, while running a disability network for employees with disabilities and long-term health conditions.
So I am a disability awareness trainer, so I run my own business providing disability awareness training, helping businesses create more inclusive workplaces for disabled people. And that could largely based on my own experience of living and working with my disability of profound deafness. So I was born profoundly deaf. I'm also a public speaker on disability and inclusion. And I also act as a consultant to various not-for-profit organisations, in particular deaf charities, so helping them as well as a consultant about that. Yeah, so I set up my business 4 years ago. So prior to that, I had a corporate career working as a senior tax manager for several accountancy firms. And in my last job, I set up a disability network, helping people working with their disabilities and also providing mentoring and support.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for coming on the Tip of My Tongue podcast. It's great to have you with me. Obviously, I talk mainly about aphasia, but I asked you to come on because I think that we're talking about disabilities, really, in your introduction. This is what you do. This is your business. Obviously, the government and generally there's a lot of talk about disability and payments. Does this affect how you work, or do you find that people are more interested in the subject now than they were maybe last year?
I think you're right. The changes in the government, not only in the UK, but mainly in the US, I think it certainly has an impact on the perception of diversity and inclusion. Diversity will include disability as well. And I think it's quite alarming seeing the changes in attitudes towards diversity and inclusion, especially in America, where they are rolling back D&I programs. They are basically asking companies to actually roll back their own D&I initiative. And also they're looking to overturn legislation in the US which protects basic rights for disabled people in the US. So quite alarming what's actually happening in the US. We haven't got it so much in the UK, but what I am finding that UK companies are being instructed by their US customers to actually go back with their D&I initiative. Otherwise, they may lose their contract. So that's quite alarming. They're having to comply with their request. Otherwise, they lose the business with their US customers. So there is a ripple effect coming from the US into the UK. And then also, obviously, the cut to the disability benefit by the UK government, which is, again, quite alarming. And I think what that means is there is more focus around that. I think what people are now thinking is that we have to reframe what we mean by diversity and inclusion. And I think moving away from perhaps creating more diverse workforces, but really thinking about what that inclusion really looks like, what does that mean, and reframing that so that we can carry on creating inclusive workplaces for people with disabilities and other groups of people. So I think it kind of has forced people to actually rethink about the whole diversity and inclusion agenda and perhaps really focus on inclusion rather than on a diversity bit. Because I think the problem it has been there's a perception that it's become tick the box exercise and just trying to create a more diverse workforce. But that's the perception. So I think we need to sort of focus more on inclusion, carry on with your inclusion journey. So I think, it has changed people's perception.
I've come to disability later in life, unfortunately, because I have a hidden disability. People with aphasia particularly have problems finding new work. I think that's fair to say. Taking that as a wider thing, do you find that people with any sort of disability are finding it more difficult to get into the workplace again, or at all, even depending on what they've started with?
I think there still is a disability employment gap. There've been some numbers going around. I don't know whether they are worse than it has been, but there's still definitely a big disability employment gap, so that more disabled people are unemployed compared to people who don't have a disability. And that hadn't gone away. No, that still needs to be addressed. But not only that, there's a disability pay gap as well. So, we're being paid less than our able peers. So I think still a problem for a lot of disabled people in getting jobs, but also staying in jobs as well. It can be difficult to get a job because of discrimination, for example, but actually when you're actually in the job, you may find yourself in a toxic workplace culture, and a lot of people leave. It's a real problem, and I don't think it's been addressed properly. And for me, going back to the government argument about cutting disability benefits and trying to get people back into work isn't really the right way to go about it, I don't think. I think you have to create more inclusive workplaces to actually encourage more disabled people to get jobs and to stay in the job. So cutting disability benefit isn't the right answer. A lot of people are on benefits because they can't get a job in the first place, and that's because of discrimination or workplaces that are not inclusive. So I think the focus needs to be on that, and only then can we address the disability employment gap.
Smaller companies probably don't have the bandwidth, if you like, to talk about things like this because they're too busy earning their crust. I speak with some experience because I used to work as a consultant with small companies, and I know they sometimes have to double up and triple up on things. I take your point completely, of course, but I wonder how do they do that? How do they make it more inclusive in their workplace without suffering, financially or otherwise?
I think, a lot of smaller companies may think, it's too expensive to start my inclusion journey. I haven't got the budget for workplace adjustment. I haven't got the number of headcount to drive that inclusion journey. From my perspective, I think there's lots of small steps you can make in starting your inclusion journey that doesn't cost a lot of money. So, just thinking about things like making sure that you can invite people in, like myself, you can run a workshop and talk about their lived experiences of working with a disability. And that will help people, start to think about what it's like to work with a disability and, think more inclusively. That wouldn't be a huge amount of money, but it's just getting somebody in to talk about their personally lived experiences. It's a great way of educating people, in a small company, to get them to start thinking about disability and inclusion. Also, a lot of workplace adjustments don't actually cost anything. So, you can have things, what we call soft adjustment, so things like changing working hours, the flexible working hours, flexible location, even just making, putting somewhere, making sure that someone sits in a quiet area of the office. There's lots of things that don't cost money, and I think if you start with a small step and soft adjustment, then it doesn't look so overwhelming. That would be a good start.
Maybe the answer possibly could be networking groups that can bring somebody like yourself in, for example, to talk about en masse. Maybe you get that sort of conversation going between business owners rather than one business on its own.
I think that's a great idea. There's so many networking groups out there, and there must be one that is suitable for smaller companies. But there's also the option to join an organisation that actually helps businesses with their inclusion journeys. I do my own training, but I'm also an associate trainer for several training organisations. And one of those is the Business Disability Forum. You become a member of this organisation and you get access to a whole range of things. So things like, training, webinars, and you can ring them up, and if you have any specific queries, they can give you expert advice. So they're a really, really good organisation. They're helping businesses with their inclusion journey. So I personally don't know how much it is to join, but there's an opportunity to actually network with other businesses through that organisation. So that can be an option, as well as more local network groups out there.
I know for a fact there's one quite near to where I live. And I've actually spoken there on a completely different subject to what we're talking about today. You can get maybe 20 people in a room. You're doing that once rather than doing it 20 times, and hopefully people will feed off each other and find out whether they can maybe get together and do stuff. Maybe groups of companies could get together and talk about what they can do for people with whatever disability they have. We're talking about everything, aren't we? We're talking about people that obviously in wheelchairs and stuff like that, which most people think of disability, somebody physically with a disability, but obviously don't really know it until you talk to someone that they've got a problem at all.
I think, there's that stereotype around disability of someone with a visible difference or someone in a wheelchair, but actually, the majority of disabilities are non-visible or hidden. I think, it's understanding that the definition of disability is much broader than you may realise. It doesn't actually require you to have a visible difference. It's just it's defined as a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial impact in your ability to do normal daily activities. They don't need to have a bit of a difference to be disabled per that legislation. And I think the other thing that people don't realise is that over 80% of disabilities are acquired during their working life. I'm in the minority being born with my disability, but over 80% are acquired, during their working life. So that's why it's really important that companies, whatever shape and size is there, they need to be aware of that and be able to support their employees, because some of those employees can become disabled in their own workplace.
The people I've spoken to on the podcast already who've not only had accidents, people who've got quite stressful jobs have ended up with strokes or some sort of disability. That's why we're talking about aphasia. You're right. I think the 80% sounds about right to me. People get it during their lifetime rather than being born with it as you were.
Loving the podcast? Subscribe for more episodes and support the journey. Your donations help keep the show thriving. Please go to tipofmytonguefilm.com. Thank you for being part of our community.
Your experience, of course, is you've come from birth, and you've managed to do loads of things. You've had a successful career. You're running your own business. You're the person that everybody should look up to and say, this can be done. Obviously, it must have been hard for you over time, has it?
Definitely. I think, when I started my career, the perception of disability was very different back then. Also, there wasn't much disability awareness at all. There wasn't the thing called workplace adjustment. We didn't have any. When I started my career, the main perception of disability is what we call the medical model of disability. So you may know this, but the medical model of disability view is that we are disabled because of our disability. So the problem lies with the disabled person. So we have to fix ourselves. We have to fit in. And that was certainly the case when I started my career, and that's why we didn't have any disability awareness. We certainly didn't have any workplace adjustment or understanding the barriers in the workplace. There was none of that whatsoever. So that was incredibly hard. But over time, the perception of disability changed from the medical model to what we call the social model of disability. Under that model, the perception is that we're not disabled by disability, but by the barriers that we face, in the workplace and in society. So then, people started talking about, okay, so what are the barriers in the workplaces? Let's help to identify those barriers, and then let's help to remove those barriers by way of workplace adjustment. So it was a very different environment, over time of my career. I had more and more workplace adjustment, and I didn't feel that I had to fix myself. I could open up and talk about my disability and get the support that I needed. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's certainly a lot more disability awareness now than there was at the start of my career. So I often look back and I just think, how the hell did I cope? I guess I had no choice, because there wasn't the concept of workplace adjustment back then.
But you were given a job, though.
Is that right? Yeah, I was, but I was turned down for a lot of jobs.
Because of your disability?
Yeah, there was discrimination, yeah.
How can we work with somebody who's, okay, I get that, yeah.
I had one prospective employer said to me, well, we'll give you a job, but we won't because you're deaf.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell it like it is.
Yeah, blunt. Very blunt.
Well, you wouldn't want to work for them anyway, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
That's your choice as well, not just theirs.
Absolutely. But it was a bit blunt at the time. But that's how it was, and I think, I think my determination and my drive got me to where I am now. Yeah. And I think, my business really came about because I'm very passionate about disability inclusion. I haven't had a lot of personal experience. And I do think it's really important that the younger generation, talking about my age now, but the younger generation didn't have to go through what I went through.
Well, lucky for them, I think. And you could say that about the working practices generally have changed over the years, as you know. And if one looks back at one's career, as one does, you think, blimey, the things you had to do or you put up with.
Put up with, tolerated. Yeah.
Tolerated, yes, tolerated. And we're not talking about anybody with disabilities. It's just general how people were, how the culture was.
Yeah, workplace culture was very different back then.
So things have, yes, I suppose if you start your career in now, at the age of, 22, 23, it's a different story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the accessible technology that we have nowadays, for someone like me who's deaf, we certainly didn't have video calls like this where I could lip read people. and get captioned at the same time. And we couldn't have any of that. It was all about the phone, that dreaded object of fear, the phone. And also, so there's a lot more accessible technology now. So that helps with any technology barriers, but also there's a lot more awareness of, environmental barriers as well. So, not necessarily just sort of physical barriers, but things like acoustics, that can have an impact on how people work. There's just a lot more awareness. And I think the biggest barrier that I find is the people's attitudes and people's assumptions and misconceptions. That is slowly improving, but that's still got a long way to go because that's quite a hard barrier to bring down. It's changing people's mindset and behaviours and attitudes towards disability. But certainly a lot better now. I've got friends who have disabled children. One of them is profoundly deaf like my dad. And she still finds it hard sometimes, but I think her life is so much easier because of things like accessible technology, there's a lot more awareness. And I think, hopefully she won't have the same struggles that I did. And all of that can have an impact on our mental health and well-being as well.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. On the technology front, because of my disability, means that my reading and my writing is awful because I can't write and I can't string words together on a piece of paper anymore like I used to. But the technology now is so brilliant. I can do all this stuff. I send emails, they've come via my phone, before. I couldn't have done that 10 years ago, even. Maybe 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, definitely not. I would have been stuck, really genuinely stuck. Presumably even now you've got technology that helps you.
Absolutely. I've got the captioned up, I've got the video call, I've got better quality hearings, even things like that, because my old hearings were terrible because the technology was terrible. And so now I've got Bluetooth hearings, which I sometimes wear. There's all sorts of things. So, like, you can have captioning software on your phone, so when you make a call, the live subtitles will come up. So if you do need to make an audio phone call, you can do because I've got, the software on my phone to come up with subtitles.
Okay. I didn't know that.
You have to pay for it though. But
well, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
But at least it exists.
Yeah, there's things are changing all the time, and it's brilliant. So I guess you probably feel the same. I wish we had all of that, when we started our career.
Yes, indeed. But that's technology moves on a pace, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Every year it seems to be quicker and quicker. Doesn't know how quickly. I think pandemic had a lot to do with moving things on. The reason that you and I are having this discussion now is partly because of the pandemic moved it on much faster than it would have done if we, just 5 years of normal,
Absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, I couldn't have done this business, 10 years ago. There wasn't that appetite for disability awareness.
Or even the technology to do it.
No, absolutely not.
Because you'd have to go and have a meeting with somebody and you have to drive to wherever it was and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we can have these conversations in pretty good quality as well.
And also I think the pandemic also highlighted the fact that, we all have differences, I think if you're working in an open plan office, you always notice the differences in people. But I think if we're all working from home, then our disability, if you like, are more noticeable, more prominent. And I think that also helps with increasing disability awareness as well.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, that's true. I think that's very true. So I was thinking, talking about environments. How do you get on when you go to a restaurant or a pub or whatever? Because they're really noisy. I mean, I find them noisy. Is it really? I mean, I'm being a bit personal here, but we don't have to do it. You don't have to talk about it if you don't. But is it difficult for you to do that sort of social stuff, or have you got used to?
I basically, when I do go to a restaurant, I don't really tend to go to pubs, but not anymore. But
Well,
when I go
isn't
to,
it?
when I go to a restaurant, I do actually, if you can do that on a online booking, actually, you can say, can I have a quiet table, please?
Right.
The biggest
Okay.
thing, the biggest problem I have is having a table next to the speaker. The speaker.
We all
They
have that
don't.
problem.
Yeah, and we went out for Dandelion on Sunday, 'cause it was Mother's Day, and the table that we had was right next to the speakers, and it was quite noisy. And I do actually put my foot down and say, no, I'm sorry, we can't sit there because, of my disability. And nearly all the time they do move us. They just swap the tables around. So I'm not afraid to actually, be assertive
Be
and
upfront
get the
about
best,
it.
Get the best possible table in the
Right.
restaurant.
Yeah.
And that is something actually, I've become better at. Be more confident and be more assertive in asking for support. And I think that has certainly improved over the years, really having the confidence to say, well, no, actually, I need more support, or we need to change this, or so I think that's really important for people with disabilities, having that confidence to say, I need more support.
When did you think that started? When you were able to do that?
I think it started really around the end, sort of in the middle point of my career, really, because I think, like I said, the perception of disability changed from the medical model to the social model. And that meant that there was more disability awareness and more talk about the barriers and what workplace adjustment we needed. So it felt safe, to actually open up and say, well, actually, I'm really, really struggling. I need a workplace adjustment. And then it kind of burst on there, because previously, prior to that, you kind of think, well, I've got to fit in, I've got to keep quiet about my disability, I mustn't be too difficult, I mustn't be awkward, fit in. Whereas now, under the social model, it's okay to talk about your disability, and I think it's okay to ask for support. And I think that helps your confidence in asking for help as well.
Yeah, obviously there has been a change. There has been a change over time, and we're all aware of it. I think probably you don't realise that you're more aware than you are. Did you think it's happened fairly gradually, and you, with peoples without any disabilities, probably realise or don't realise that it's happening, and then they're just adjusting with whatever's going on. I find that most people are very helpful, and they realise there's something not quite correct going on here. And I say, well, I'm sorry, I can't always say what I'm going to say properly. And then people just give you time to do it, which is good. Maybe times past they wouldn't have, they would just walk past you and said, no, get on with it.
I think that's definitely true. I think, certainly with the younger generation, there's a lot more, empathy and more compassion and more, awareness. So, and that hope to create that safe space where, you felt that you could stay, having problems here. So, where previously, if you were in that situation before in a shop, you might have, you might have just walked away, not got what you needed, because it wasn't that
because nobody would help.
No, nobody would help. It wasn't that safe space. So I think that has really changed, and I think that's really encouraging. I mean, and for me personally, with my disability of deafness, we've had an awful lot of publicity. There's a lot of role models out there if you think about Strictly Come Dancing and Rose winning, that competition, being deaf herself. That was the real start of increased deaf awareness then. I mean, she's done an awful lot increasing in deaf awareness. And now we have a lot more deaf people on TV, and it kind of like snowballed from that, which is great. And of course, British Sign Language is now an officially recognised language.
Yeah.
So people are talking more about sign language. So yeah, it sort of snowballs really.
Yeah. I mean, you've got signed TV programs now, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And also politicians sometimes have somebody signing to the side of them, don't they? Which is good stuff, isn't it?
It's fantastic to see it in my lifetime. I mean, you can imagine if we were born 100 years ago, we wouldn't deal with this, and it's better late than never. So it certainly made my life a lot easier. But also, I've met so many more disabled people as well. We're all coming together, talking about our experiences like we are today. Through my business, I've met so many disabled people, and that's really always good, because you get more support, and you meet people who just know what it's like to live and work with a disability. So that can make you feel supported and empowered.
The lived experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's the big takeaway, isn't it, really? Is that if you can talk with people who have the same problem that you have, or a similar problem, which is why I'm doing this.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant.
I do my best. It's interesting. And I'm talking to you because, we're not talking particularly about aphasia, but it's all part of the same problem, isn't it, really? We're going back to the inclusivity that we're talking about. We're talking about your problem, my problem, somebody else's problem. We're trying, fix it together. One last question, I suppose. What about the future? What's the future for Sarah?
Well, at the moment, I'm very happy running my business. So I'm going to carry on as long as I can with my business. I've been running my business for 4 years now, so I don't know where the time has gone, to be honest. But to me, it doesn't feel like a job. I absolutely love it. I'm really passionate about it, so I want to carry on as long as possible. And I think, I just want to carry on making a difference. It's something that runs deep in my DNA. And that's why I started a disability network in my last job, because I wanted to make a difference. So just sort of carry on being a disability advocate. Also enjoy the benefits of all the changes that we've been talking about. And also being really clear about making my life as easy as possible.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been really interesting to talk to you. We've covered most of the
we covered a lot between
most of the subjects. Thank you for coming on, and obviously we will keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep it. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
No problem. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this On the Tip of My Tongue podcast. We hope you found it helpful and informative. Now, if you want more help and information about strokes and aphasia, please go to stroke.org.uk, say aphasia, that's SAY, aphasia, all one word, .org, or the aphasia page of nhs.uk. Enjoying the podcast? Subscribe for more episodes and support the journey. Please go to tipofmyfilm.com in the description. Thank you. This has been a Buffalo Lounge production. Please follow Buffalo Lounge on all the socials.